at the start you mentioned Chuangzi, who's one of the other kind of key figures here. I read something that was saying that he kind of prefigured the idea of evolution by natural selection in kind of talking about just a kind of idea. It's tied up, I guess, with the idea of the Tao just being this constant flow. He just seemed to have the insight that kind of water becomes, fish, and fish become animals. And yeah, I think that's that kind of that vision of how forms change seems to fall kind of out of the Tao quite nicely.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, in fact, that's why a lot of ecology is very much Taoist principle as its roots, just because you're essentially, again, you're talking about the same thing. You're talking about the way nature works. You're talking about some basic universal principles there. So I think that understanding nature, you can never have studied Taoism, but if you really understand nature well, I think you understand a lot of Taoist concepts.
Right. And you also mentioned Heraclitus, this Greek philosopher who, was super Taoist, right? And was it the logos? Is that what he referred to? Basically the same idea as the Tao?
Yeah, totally. In Greek, when you translate it, sometimes the logos seem to have this much more orderly and rational aspect to it. It really isn't the way he means it. He really is talking about kind of this universal order to all things, but much like the Tao is, this kind of essential principles behind everything else, which sound a lot more Taoist when you start looking deeper into it than when you just look at the dictionary translation.
Right. And then also, I think he had this quote, something like "everything flows, nothing lasts," and that seems to be kind of also similar to kind of seeing evolution by natural selection before Darwin. I feel like there's a similar thing where once you take this perspective, you can have the insight of kind of mountains rising and falling, even kind of tectonic plate motion. They obviously not knowledge of the specific knowledge of plates, but that's quite a way to see the world that you could, without any scientific evidence, you can look at a mountain that's been there for generation after generation and yet get that it's gonna crumble at some point.
Yep, absolutely. And that's kind of the long perspective of it that clearly it's harder to get when you're limited to one lifetime right in front of your nose. But yeah, eventually it's the nature of things for nothing to last, for everything to be transformed, to everything to be in constant state of flux. And ultimately it's almost like even the Buddhist idea of impermanence, right? It's just that nothing is gonna remain absolutely the same forever. It's just not the way things are.
Right. And so to close and bring this full circle, you mentioned Buddhism. At the start, you spoke about coming to Taoism through Zen. And Zen is a kind of synthesis, right, of Taoism and Buddhism?
Yeah, because when Buddhism arrived in China, one of the schools of thought that developed it was, the creation of what in China was called Chan Buddhism was really a mix of imported Buddhism with the existing Taoism in China, and the mix of the two creating Zen Buddhism. So Zen Buddhism is the type of Buddhism that has the most Taoist concepts attached to it. Then, it becomes something else as it goes, moves across culture, gets to Japan. There's a whole lot of more Japanese ideas attached to it. But, that's definitely, you see Zen as sort of the marriage between Buddhism and Taoism, which in itself is a very Taoist thing right there. The idea that there's another religion, great, let's take the best from it, we'll take the best from ours, mix it together. Not exactly a super common thing. In traditions that tend to draw the line hard between good and evil, the notion that you mix with something else is blasphemy. You're mixing something holy with something terrible. How would you? Whereas that's not usually the way it's in more Eastern traditions.